So today what we're talking about are tools and the menu bar here in Photopea. Again, like we talked about with document setup, panels, and tools, the tools and menu bar and their functionality in Photopea is very similar to Photoshop. There are some things that may take additional hunting, or it may be like in an extra drop-down menu, but for the most part, everything is relatively similar. So what we're going to start with are just some of the various tools. Moving, if we're looking at the toolbar on the left over here, okay, these are some of the editing and drawing tools, mostly drawing tools that you'll be using in various projects. The first one we're going to start with is right here. It's called the eyedropper tool. Okay, eyedropper. And what this does is you can go anywhere in an open file and click. And I want you to pay attention down here to this little color right here, because it just changed to this pink color. If I go ahead and I'm like, you know what? I really like this reddish color right here on my lip. I'm going to click it. And you notice it changed color. Or if I want my hair color, or my sweater color, or I like this shadow that's on my neck. Okay, what it does is the eyedropper will pick out specific colors, but it picks from the pixel that you are hovering over. Okay, and this is great because then that color will stay there, and you can draw with it, paint with it, do whatever you want. And if you go into your swatches panel, it becomes a swatch. Okay, we'll get into some other tools, and there are ways to use the eyedropper tool without having to actually click on the eyedropper. Up next, we're just going to go down the line, is the healing brush. If you click and hold down, you see the healing brush. You're going to want to click on it. What the healing brush does is it replaces a portion or an area of your photo or your document with another part of the document. Now, when you see it, it'll make more sense. I'm just going to increase this to 50 pixels in size. Okay, when you're up here looking at this bar right here, this little symbol right here is the symbol of the tool. This is the pixel size of the brush. And this will tell you what the source is for the healing brush. So I'm on the current layer. I want to be on the current layer. What you're going to do is, say, for example, I don't like my facial hair right here. I want to get rid of it a little bit. I'm going to zoom in. I want to get rid of it. Okay, some of these hairs are awkward. But I don't want to just paint over it with a solid color because, well, that'll stand out awkwardly. What you can do is you can use the healing brush. You're going to, what I'll do is I'll hover over an area of skin, hold down the Alt button, and this is both for Mac and PC, and it's the same in Photoshop. Hold down the Alt button, click on another area of skin that I like, and what it's going to do is it's going to pull that as a sample. The program is just going to take it as a sample. So as I move my circle now, it's no longer clear. You can see it looks a little skin colored. So I want to do, instead of erasing or brushing over, I can use the healing tool. I'm going to click, and I'm just going to start brushing. And it'll start replacing everything. It'll start replacing all of it. And I let go, and boom. What it does is it covers up, in this case, it covers up the beard hair and blends in what I've just painted with what's there. Okay? Unlike Photopea, Photoshop automatically blends as you brush. Photopea, it blends after you brush. Okay, so everything, with Photopea, it's gonna look a little weird, and then it goes away. Oop. Now, see what happened was, I'm sure you noticed as I went up, you saw some hair. So I took my sample from right here. The sample, what it does is as I'm brushing, it's not just this, it's taking the sample from this entire area. Okay, so it's like if I pulled my sample from here, wherever I click will start from here. And then as I drag, the sample is just gonna pull from the rest of the area around it. So that's why some of my hair, because as I went up, the sample pulls up, or the sample cursor pulls up. So you're gonna have to, sometimes you have to do it in pieces. Let's do a little bit more. And what's really cool, like one of the reasons why I like this is it also like it takes shadows into account. Some of it is just, you know, the beard hair is dark, so it's gonna darken it up. Then I can zoom out and be like, oh, look it, the beard's gone. It's a really awkward shadow, but that's what the healing brush does. I'm gonna go back to my history, and I'm gonna go back to open because I don't want that there. Okay, up next is the brush tool. The brush tool is for painting, okay? Look at all that painting. Up here, you have, again, it shows you the symbol of what the brush tool is. You can pick the size of your brush. You can go all the way up to 1,000 pixels. We're gonna stick with 50. We talked about opacity. We talked about it the other day in terms of a blending option with your layer panel. What you can do is you can knock instead of knocking down the opacity of your layer and it affecting the whole layer, you can knock down the opacity of just the brush, okay? So at 100, brown blob, I bump it down to 50, you can see that the opacity has been dropped. Excuse me. I'm gonna bump that back up to 100. And then also you have blending modes here as well. Okay, so you don't have to rely on the layers panel to add blending option effects. You can do that in the brush itself, okay? So I can click soft light, and I can do this. I can make myself more tan, and it's because it's a blending mode, it's taking into consideration what's in the layer underneath the brush. Think of it like you're paying more attention to the lighting effects. Okay? But that's an option that you can play with. With the brush, going back to the pixel size, where it says hardness, hardness refers to the edge of the brush. I'm going to increase my brush size so you can all see this a little better. This is with a hardness of 100. Oh, I need to change this back to normal. It looks like a solid circle. If I take the hardness all the way down to 0, it fuzzes out the lines, okay? I like using a hardness of 0 and an opacity of somewhere between 10 and 20 if I'm trying to throw in shadows, okay? It means that I'm gonna be layering a lot, that I'm gonna do a lot of brush strokes. We already see on my neck where I did it, it's starting to make it a little darker. It enhances the shadow a little bit. It doesn't entirely make sense for this photo because of the light source, but it's really helpful. And the brush tool is one of your standard standard drawing tools. Okay. Moving on to the eraser, we're going to jump over the clone tool for now. The eraser tool, it's exactly as it says. It erases. Boom. Again, up here, you can increase the size of your brush. You can change the hardness. You can change the shape of your brush. Okay. You can do the same thing with your paint tool. Okay, as you can change the shape of your brush. Oh, I still have that. Opacity changes with the tool you're using. So I had my opacity at 10 for the paintbrush. the opacity for my eraser does not stay the same, okay? But here's another brush. And one of the things that's great with Photopea, I forgot to say this, is if you have a touch screen and a stylus, then you can adjust whether or not the stylus pressure controls opacity or stylus pressure controls size. You can have them both on, you can have them both off. Okay, for those of you who have a touch screen that has stylus pressure control, this works. I have a laptop that has a touch screen, but the touch screen itself is not was not manufactured to take stylus pressure into account, so that's something that I was not able to use. You can do it most often with tablets. Okay, so that's your eraser tool. And I'm just going to be going through the basic tools that you're going to be using most often for the projects that we're doing for this semester. Any of the other tools we will touch on, but we're not going to go super in depth with. I want you to explore those on your own, okay? Because they are used. I use everything quite frequently, but it's also going to vary from project to project. I have some projects where like half the tools I will never use, and then I have projects where I use literally everything. Okay. Underneath the eraser is the paint bucket and gradient tool. So the paint bucket, literally imagine you're spilling a bucket of paint. Okay, we'll do some crazy color for this so you can see it very clearly. We'll do green. Okay, paint bucket, I go ahead and click, and it will fill the space. Oh, I didn't hit OK, that's why. So with Photopea, when you're selecting a color, you have to hit OK for it to select the color. With Photoshop, all you have to do is find your color and click out of the color selection box, and it'll automatically have it picked. Oh, I accidentally hit the back button. I'm sorry. Okay. So I have paint bucket selected. It acts like it spills the paint. And you remember we talked about using the magic wand tool the other day, and how you can select it will select a contiguous selection of pixels. Well, the paint bucket does the same thing. The paint bucket is going to fill in what makes sense to it. You notice that you have a tolerance amount up here that you can select. Okay, if I go down to 10, it's not going to fill in as much when I use it. The gradient tool is exactly what it is. It creates a gradient. Now, your base gradient, you can see it up here, is created from the colors you have selected down here. These are your foreground and your background colors right now. So right now I have it green to white. You click this down arrow, this drop down arrow, there are gradient presets that you can select from. Okay. I'm going to keep it with the green and the white just so you can see it. Click once, hold down the mouse and drag it in the direction that you want the gradient to go. Hold down the shift key to make sure that it stays straight vertical or horizontal or at a 45-degree angle. And you let go, and it creates a gradient. Now, what if you're thinking, oh, well, I don't want a gradient for for the whole image. I want it for just a specific selection. That's totally fine. I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to use the magic wand tool. I'm going to hold down the shift key to make sure that I'm selecting as much of the background as possible. I'm going to go back to the gradient. I'm going to click to create my start point. I'm going to drag in the direction that I want the gradient to go. I'm going to release, and it's going to create a gradient in only the area that I've selected with the magic wand, okay? You can do the same thing with the paint bucket tool. It's on, like, I can click on my face all I want. It's not going to fill anything because I have an area selected. Always be aware that if you have any area selected, even if it's a single pixel selected, you will not be able to use a tool outside of that selection, okay? Same thing goes, we want to use the paintbrush tool. It will not let me paint over my face, only in the selection. I want to use the eraser tool. Exact same thing. I cannot erase my face because it is not selected. Okay. We're gonna move to blur, sharpen, and smudge. I'm gonna deselect everything. So right here, it looks like you have a little water droplet. It's called the blur tool, and it does exactly what you think it's going to do. I'm gonna bump this up to 100 pixels in size. I'm gonna set the strength to 100. I'll show you the difference between 100 and lower. I'm gonna blur out my eye. There, I blurred it out. You can see the difference between between the two eyes. One is blurry and one is not. I'm gonna undo that. I'm gonna bump the strength down to 20, we'll do it down to 50. So again, you can see the difference in blurriness. I'm gonna jump back up to 100 and blur the other eye so you can see the difference in blurriness. You can see that that the left eye is far more blurry, okay? You kind of lose some of the definition in the pupil. The highlight is not as pronounced. I use the blur tool when it comes to fuzzing out edges, okay? Like if I have these creases in my neck right here. If I don't want to see those, but I don't want to use the healing tool, I don't want them to go away totally, I will use the blur tool just to blur it out just a little bit, okay? I also use the blur tool, like if I was going to increase this, the canvas size, if I was going to increase this size, let's see, image, canvas size, we're gonna increase the width to 1500, okay? If I wanted to select these blank areas, I'm gonna fill them with a brown. Now, I'm gonna use the paint bucket tool. And what I'm about to say works the exact same with the brush tool, okay? I wanna select a brown color, but I don't wanna have to go all the way into the eyedropper tool. When you're in the paint bucket tool, hold down the Alt key and click. That should work. Nope, it's not working. Well, I guess that's just a Photoshop feature then. It worked for me the other day, and I could totally just be forgetting. Anyway, in Photoshop, what you can do is in the paint bucket tool or the paintbrush tool, you can hold down the Alt key and it will turn into the eyedropper tool until you release the Alt key. Once you release the Alt key, it is no longer the eyedropper tool. But when you hit Alt in the paint bucket or brush tool and you click on a color, it will function like the eyedropper, so you don't have to constantly go between tools. So then what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna open the color, I'm gonna pick one of these background brown colors, hit OK. Using the paint bucket tool, I'm going to fill these. Now you can see that, okay, it's a solid line, but the brown doesn't match up 100%. This is where I will go in with the blur tool and blur out the line a little bit. Blur does not do it 100%. Okay, we'll get into another tool that will help. After blur, you have sharpen. Sharpen is the exact opposite of blur. Okay, blur is going to make things fuzzy. Sharpen is going to make things a bit more pixelated. Okay, if I go ahead and try and use it, you can see that it's like things are getting pixelated. It's adding more color. What it's doing is it's basically condensing the pixels. When you blur things together, like if you were to blur a pixel, it increases the pixels but spreads the color throughout the pixels. When you sharpen, it takes the color and pulls them into pixels. So then that's why you have pixels here that are white. Okay? After sharpen, you have smudge. Smudge is great with the blur tool. I'm going to increase its size. 100. Strength, we'll start with 100. This is a tool that'd be great if I want to blur this line out. Ooh. That's really strong. Bump that down. Anyway, what smudge does is it literally smudges. Like imagine like, you know, when you're drawing or writing with pencil and everything gets smudged when the oils on your hand touch the surface. That's what this does, is it literally smudges whatever you're working with. Okay? It does function a bit like the paintbrush tool in that it's like where you smudge the quote unquote smudge line is going to be where you're dragging the brush. Okay, this is where it's like after using a smudge tool, this is when I will go in with a blur tool and I will blur it out. It helps remove some of the awkward smudging that sometimes you aren't able to remove entirely. After the smudge tool, so moving down, we have the dodge and burn tool. Sponge tool we'll get into later. Dodge and burn. Easiest way to explain this is you're working with highlights and shadows. Okay, again, I'm going to increase the size of my brush. The dodge tool is for highlighting. The burn tool is for shadows. Okay, you can work with shadows, midtones, and highlights if you look up here at the top of the screen. Okay, exposure, think of it like opacity. It kind of functions in the same way. So I'm going to work with midtones. And what it does is it highlights the area that I brush. Okay? It's midtones. Let's see what shadows does. Shadows is going to make it a little brighter. Kind of creating a Phantom of the Opera mask right now. I go into highlights, does the same thing. But it also makes it look like my face has like a neutron star in it. Now, even though it's solid white, nothing is erased, okay? I'm gonna Control Z all that. Now, I'm gonna change, actually, I'm gonna keep this at 50. Go back to midtones, so you can see it. So this is 50% exposure, okay? Go up to 100. This is what 100 looks like. This is something that as you go through your projects, if you use it, you're gonna have to play with it, figuring out what works best for you. Now, I have the hardness set to 100 for this first area. I'm gonna knock down the hardness to 0. You see the edges are far more softened. So I can highlight my forehead. And it looks more natural. Obviously, it doesn't look natural, but it looks more natural than when I had the hardness all the way up at 100%. The burn tool, like I said, shadows. It does the opposite. it darkens. When I'm working with shadows, I will either use the burn tool or the paintbrush with black or dark brown or dark blue selected. And then I will reduce the hardness and reduce the exposure to about 10% or 20%. And then I will just layer on top of each other. Hey, I just burned part of my face. I did some like for what we do, I did some shadow work, even though it doesn't make sense. I can then use the burn tool again to darken up on top of what I just did. If I move to an area that I haven't done yet, it's still going to be 50%, but it's going to be like I never did anything. It's not going to be this super darkness that I've done here. It's not layered, okay? I can even do a third layer. I could go super dark with this. You can do the same thing with the dodge tool. Now that's midtones. Let's get into shadows. I use shadows. What it's doing is it's accentuating the dark parts, okay? That's really what dodge and burn tools do, is the dodge tool pulls from the highlights, pulls from the lightness of the pixels and accentuates that. The burn tool pulls from the darker ones, okay? So that's if I were playing with shadows. If I were playing with the highlights, this is what it does. Now, I'm going to remove all that. If I take, let's see, we'll do this. We'll have fun with this a little bit. Gonna bump that up to 300, bump the hardness down to 0. What I'm doing is I'm burning my whole face. Just doing this very quickly. There's no rhyme or reason to it, nothing fancy. Really want to make sure that I'm hitting everything. Midtones, gonna do highlights. It's like, ew, it grays it out a little bit. I'm gonna do shadows. And what I'm doing, and why I'm doing this, is to show the layering, is to show more of the layering effect with the burn tool. What happens when you pull out the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows of an image using the burn tool. Okay. For me and what I do, I mostly use the midtone tool if I'm working with any sort of flesh, because shadow usually tends to go too dark. Unless if, I want to look like it's truly like a burn victim or something, or I'm like crazy sunburned. And the highlight grays everything out. And so I tend to work with just the midtones. It does what I need. The text tool, self-explanatory. It's text. Click and drag to create your text box. Start typing. Up here at the top, hit the check mark. And then you can move the text using your move tool. Okay? With the text tool, okay, I'm going to create another thing. I'm going to be, let's see, drawing for theater is awesome. Sorry, drawing for theater 2 is awesome. Okay. I'm going to highlight it. I want to increase its size. It's going to be constrained to the text box that you've created. So if I want to make it all one line, I have to increase the width of my text box. I can adjust the color of my text. Okay, see I changed it to orange. I can also warp it. With the style, this is where you're going to select the style. So if I say, okay, I want it as an arc. I want it to go around my head. You can adjust the bend. You can adjust the horizontal distortion. You can adjust the vertical distortion. And I'm going to hit the check mark, and there's my text. Can't read some of it, but it's because it's warped. And this is great for if you need, this is great for, you know, if you're creating a logo, something like a logo or a brand, and you want to have some curved text around an image or something like that. The warp tool is really great. Okay. What's also cool, so I have drawing for theater 2 is awesome selected. Okay. I can press down, I can press the T button. The T button brings you into the text. Okay. I can click warp and adjust it once more. I don't have to have it selected in the text box. Okay. I'm just gonna play with this and give it some weirdness. Hit OK, and I've changed it. Okay, so you can change it after you've actually created it. Our next set of, we're going to jump a couple tools. We're going to go to what I call create shapes. The default is rectangle. If you press and hold down, you have rectangle, ellipse, line, parametric shape, and custom shape. Okay, these are literally just a bunch of shapes that you can create. Okay, up at the top, it'll tell you what you're following, whether you're following a path, shape, or pixels. I leave it on shape because it's the easiest to understand and work with. Fill type, you can select texture, gradient, solid color, no fill. You can select the color. If you double click this little image right here, you can adjust to pick a specific color. Make sure you hit OK. The stroke is what's on the outside. Okay. We'll do a stroke of red with a point of 5. I'll draw my rectangle, and you can see that is a blue rectangle with a red stroke, a red outline. I go down to ellipse. Nope, I didn't select ellipse. Again, if I hold down shift, I can get a perfect circle. If I don't, I can do an oval. Same colors are selected, the same fill and stroke are selected. Line, it's just a line. The parametric shape, you have to select the number of sides you want, okay? I want 20 sides. Well, it gives me 20 sides, but it looks like more like a circle. I bump it down to 8. And I get a hexagon. If I go back to the move tool, I can move these around as I want. Each shape gets its own layer. Okay? Control Z to get rid of some of this stuff. I don't want it. It's getting in the way. Custom shape. Let's see. Custom shape, you have to select the shape you want. Okay, there are a bunch of presets. Okay, look, there's Facebook buttons and Google and Twitter and Android and Apple. That's fun. Select your object. Hold shift to make everything symmetrical and equidistant. Again, fill and stroke are the exact same. They're dark blue and they're red because it's what I have set. Leave that, might be a gearhead. Okay, so that is it for the tools. If you have any questions, write them down. I'm going to do a moment for questions at the end. If you have questions, just say your name and start talking. Looking at the menu bar. So up here at the menu bar, okay? We've gone through file, you know, creating a new file, opening one from your computer, exporting as different files. I want to get into the rest of everything. Edit, and we'll get into a lot of the super specifics in some upcoming classes with the various with our various projects and some demos. But the edit menu, these are tools and functions that you can use to edit your selections. Okay, these in the edit menu, you have things that are broad, like general or broad, and things that are specific. Things like undo and redo affects the whole document. Okay. Your transform tools, which we will get into next week when we get into collaging. Transform can affect layers. It can affect a whole document. It can affect very specific selections. So it's like if I wanted to work on just my eyeball, I could transform just my eyeball. Image adjustments. This is looking at color and saturation, black and white, certain photo filters, working with channels, adjusting the RGB qualities of your entire image. Canvas size is, well, it's the canvas you're working on, but think of it in terms of like, think of it in terms of like a poster board, okay? Your poster board is the canvas. The images or the things that you have on your poster board are the images, okay? So if I increase my image size without increasing the canvas size, my image may go off the canvas. Think of like, okay, if you have an 18 by 24 inch poster board, and you've printed something off that's 24 by 36, it's going to go off the edges of the poster board. Same thing with this. If I were to take the image that I have now and make it bigger, it would go off the edges of the canvas. So if you're adjusting image size, make sure that your canvas size is appropriate to what you're working on. It does not mean that you have to adjust the canvas size. It just means that you need to be aware of it. Okay? Transform, you can rotate 90 degrees, rotate 100 degrees, flip horizontally, flip vertically. Transform, that should also be, yep, it's also under edit, under transform. Rotate, flip, flip. With Photoshop, it's just under edit, transform. And unfortunately, there's no hotkey for it. It's not under image, okay? Layer is for adjusting layers. You can create new layers, folders, you can duplicate, delete, you can add a fill layer, you can add raster, and you can add raster, vector, and clipping masks, which we will get into. We will get into masking with our costume rendering project. You can rasterize a layer. That's usually done. It's done for shapes and text, because shapes and text are vector drawings. You know, we talked about how vector drawings aren't pixelated. And so when you rasterize it, it makes it editable like an image. So if you rasterize text, you cannot alter what the text says, but you can alter it in the way that the warp function did in the text tool. You can resize it, you can bend it, you can recolor it. You treat it, you're able to treat it like you would any other normal layer. Okay, merge down or merge layers. What this means is like we talked about the other day, is just merging layers. Merge down means it merges, like whatever layer you're on, it merges the layer you're on with all the layers below it. So like, I look over here, all merges literally down, okay? Merge layers, it's not selected because I only have one. If I click both layers and go to layer, merge layers is selected, okay? Select. This is used for making specific selections. Okay, oh. Okay, I'm going to delete this shape real quick. Okay, this is great. I love this tool. Select color range. What this does is I can make a selection on, I can click somewhere on in my project, in my photo, and it will select the pixels closest to that color, and we'll select all of them. If I hold down Shift, it will, oh no, it won't do it. Okay. Again, this is where I'm still figuring out some of the finer differences between Photoshop and Photopea. Photopea will only let you select one selection. In Photoshop, you can select once, hold down the Shift key, and select a second area or select a second pixel, and it will add to your color range selection. You're going to hit OK, and it selects. It makes a selection of those pixels. Okay. So then I can like go ahead and I can use the paint bucket tool or something if I want to. Okay. So select all, deselect inverse. So select all, self-explanatory, it selects everything. So deselect, you select nothing. Select inverse. I'm going to use the magic wand tool real quick, and I'm going to just, actually, I'm going to do this. I'm going to select the background. Okay. If I go select inverse or Shift Control I, right now I have my background selected. I go inverse, I have selected myself. So you literally selected the inverse, the opposite, or everything else that isn't selected. I use this tool a lot when I'm trying, sometimes when I'm trying to delete certain portions that I don't want. I will highlight everything that everything that I want to keep. I'll select the inverse and then I'll press delete. Or if I want to, I want to color a specific area with the paintbrush tool or the paint bucket tool, then what I will do is I'll highlight what I don't want colored. I'll select the inverse. I will create a new layer, and then I will use and then because the selection is still made, I will fill the area on a new layer. Okay, I'll actually walk through that right now. Okay, so right now I have my head and body selected, but I don't want that one. Say I just want to edit the background. So I'll hit select, inverse. Okay, so I'm going to change the background behind me. I'm going to create a new layer. What I'm about to do, if I use the paint bucket, change this color to an orange. If I use the paint bucket on my background layer, it's like the magic wand tool, it's only going to fill in the pixels that make sense. Okay, the pixels that are closest to the one that I selected. If I go to a new transparent layer, it's going to fill everything. And it's going to fill everything because there's nothing there. There's nothing existent in that layer. There's no pixel for it to be based off of. So it's just going to fill everything that I have selected. I don't like that orange. It's a very bright orange. It's hurting my eyes. So that's the selection. Filter, going back into the menu bar, filter is where you can add super cool filter effects. Okay, we'll do, let's see, clouds. I'm gonna make sure you have the correct layer selected. Filter, render, clouds. It adds clouds, and it's based off the colors. It's based off the colors that I have in here. I can do, let's see, filter, blur. We'll do distort. And I'll do stylize oil paint. It takes the entire layer and makes it look like an oil painting. Okay. With this window that came up, you can adjust it's not letting me click. Oh, there it is. Okay, so it took a second. So the same thing happens with Photoshop. As you adjust a filter, you can increase the radius, the cleanliness, the scale. You can adjust things within your filter. It's showing you a preview of everything, so that's why it's going so slow. Like, I can't just click and drag. I have to click, drag, and wait a second, and then it will adjust. And this is all because I have preview. The way it should work is if I don't click the preview, you don't see it, but I can adjust things far faster. And then hit preview, give it a minute, and there's the filter effect. And now I look like an oil painting, okay? But that's what all of these things are under the filter menu, is they're just different filters that you can put on top of a layer, okay? The window button, these are the different panels that you can select to work with, okay? We're going to be using history, swatches, layers, and channels most often. Brush is super helpful if you want to use it. What brush does is it allows you to easily select the size, angle, roundness, hardness, spacing, shape, everything to do with your brush, okay? So you can select different brush shapes and sizes. And just what that looks like. With Photoshop, you have a gazillion options for different brush selections, and there's actually certain ways you can create your own paintbrush shape. Okay. Okay, everything else under more language, theme, install Photopea, those are things that are specific to you, working with like, okay, what's the language you want to work with? Do you want to download Photopea to just be on your computer so you don't have to work in the browser? Things like that, okay? Are there any questions with anything that we've talked about today? Okay. So, like I said, if you have any questions, speak up. I'm going to go ahead and I will end this for today. For those of you that were not with us in the beginning, I am working with FERPA regulations and Zoom to make sure that these videos that I'm recording, these videos that I'm putting on YouTube, don't show anybody's faces, but also are edited in a way so that everything still makes sense and are crisp, clean, and easy to watch. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me by email. And also, as a reminder that you need to start looking at your degree works and your class schedules for the fall and get with your advisors, okay? Thank you all very much and have a fantastic day.